I hope you guys enjoy the podcast, and we're going to start now. And Braelynn is going to be moderating. So, yeah, let's have fun. Let's start this thing. Go ahead, Braelynn.
Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome to the fourth installment of Content Creator and Theory Crafter podcast discussing and debating Neverwinter topics largely based around Mod 16, the Undermountain. I'm Bray, and I'll be helping this podcast by moderating and doing my best to move topics along. On behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank those present for taking time out of their busy lives to participate, and to thank those tuning in for taking the time out to hang with us. We're going to start this podcast a little differently by introducing each of the guests and asking a few off-topic questions in order to get to know them a little better, have some laughs, and break the ice. First is GalacticUnderwear. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm GalacticUnderwear. I usually post content, mostly TR related, as I'm like really retarded when it comes to other classes. But I do also put out some content about mechanics of certain dungeons, based off things I've heard off of people like Sharpedge and stuff. Like I try to make the best possible guides possible to help people out. But mostly, I'm here for the betterment of the game, in my own way, because as you all know, math blows my mind, and I'm not really good at it. So yeah, I try to play my part, and I also Twitch stream, as you know, and post YouTube memes and videos and helpful stuff on my YouTube channel. And just so you know, I'm all from Greece, and my real name is Dimitri. That's about it.
Okay, then I have two off-topic questions for you. The first one is, the zombie apocalypse is coming. Who are three people you want on your team?
Julia, Foss, and Teramac.
And why?
Because, they protect me with their awesome coding skills.
And if aliens landed on Earth tomorrow and offered to take you home with them, would you go?
Yes, I would. I would go because, my name's GalacticUnderwear. I belong in space, so I would definitely go back to my home for sure. Is that good enough?
That's good enough.
Very good.
Next on the list is Putz. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Putz. I'm the guild leader for Myrmidons. I've been playing since beta, and I've had builds, and I'm pretty active on the forum.
And your two questions are, number one, if you could choose any person from history to be your imaginary friend, who would it be and why?
From history, I think it would probably have to be Milton Friedman, because I enjoy economics, and he's pretty...
The second one is, what is your favorite item you've bought this year?
My 1 month vacation to Mexico.
Yeah, I saw your pictures. It was beautiful.
Lucky son of a bitch. Okay, keep going.
Okay, the next person on our list is Sharpedge. If you could introduce yourself.
I'm Sharpedge. I generally just post guides on the official forums, occasionally write articles for Neverwinter Unblogged, and post very bad videos to YouTube with no video editing because I'm bad at it and don't have any software for it and don't really care about it.
That's fair enough, though. Your first question is, what fictional world or place would you like to visit?
Fictional world. I guess probably the world from Game of Thrones or something like that, just because of how interesting the place would be.
And then your second is, if you could be any supernatural creature, what would you be and why?
Not really sure. Not thought of that before, and I don't really know many supernatural creatures. So
you'd be a rogue.
Really
Admit it. You would be a rogue. Admit it. You'd be a supernatural rogue.
Okay, a rogue wizard.
Okay. Last is Soly. If you could introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, I'm Soly the Scourge, except they're taking Scourge out of the name of Scourge Warlock, so I'm kind of thinking of going like Sully the Last Scourge, like an Avatar the Last Airbender type vibe. But I don't really like labels, but if I had to label myself, I'd say I'm probably a Neverwinter conspiracy theory video type person. I don't know. I do a bit of everything.
Your first question is, have you ever completed anything on your bucket list, and what was it?
I have a bucket list. I do like visiting Las Vegas. I do like gambling, I guess. It's fun to me. But and I
Yeah.
have been to Vegas multiple times, usually road trip.
I love the
Adds a little
slot
bit.
machine.
Yeah.
I'm like a slot machine addict. Uh, the second one is, if you had a time machine, would you go back in time or into the future?
Definitely into the future. Like going back and telling myself like, wisdom, places that I messed up, would be nice, but like the future holds so many possibilities with like virtual reality and stuff and like life-sustaining technology that I think I'd go to the future, get some of that life-sustaining technology, and then you can do whatever you want. So
That's a cool viewpoint on it. Moving forward, I'll ask each member present in alphabetical order a question in which they can give their opinion. After that, sorry.
It's okay, sweetheart. Keep going.
Sorry. After that person is finished speaking, the others will be able to chime in with their own opinions. To note, opinions given here today are based on the mod version before today's patch and today's patch notes. So nobody has tested anything that has come out today. The first question is for Galactic Underwear. Please give us your opinions on the need to balance rewards for each mod.
Okay, thank you, Braelynn. I think the need to balance rewards is huge. I've touched on this topic many times in the past. I feel like people who play this game play to have a sense of progression, right? That's why we all play MMOs. We want to feel like we're achieving something when we're doing something. So if I'm going to run a dungeon, I don't want to just run it because I want to run with my friends. That should be not just the sole reason I'm running a dungeon. I want to run a dungeon to feel the reward, feel rewarded at the end of it. But as it stands now, most dungeons don't reward you hardly anything besides refinement, an insignia, or a very useless companion. Granted, in the next mod, companions are all useful, most of them. They've been reworked to actually give even more stats than legendary mounts do, oddly enough. But yeah, I've touched upon this so many times in the past. They need to balance out the rewards. Every dungeon people can go to, like every single dungeon in the game, even Cloak Tower, it needs to be where it rewards you something good for you to want to go there, or else you're simply not going to go there. And as it stands now, like the best place to farm is Cradle, even though UES's Ultimate Enchanting Stones have dropped in price. It's absolutely the one place you think of that will actually reward you something good, unless, of course, there's some item or piece of gear or seals that you need. Then you'll run Ravenloft if you need that piece of gear, for example. But they really need to refix the have a look and rework the loot system. Foss has promised that they're looking into it, but I haven't seen any good loot ever since they've said that. So yeah, that's my opinion on that.
Anybody else have an opinion on it?
I think that we kind of have to look at the history of the game. And for those of us that were playing in beta and mod 1, we had 8 dungeons, and each dungeon dropped something unique and benefit to different classes and different characters. So in theory, you could introduce a dungeon and replace one key item, but you don't have to kill everything. And what we've gone to is the new dungeon replaces everything that was older than this new release. So, for a while, CR was the place to be, and now it's not. It's already dead content. The new mod's not even out yet. But that old model was very interesting to me, and it's gone. And if I was them, I would relook at that, especially with a level cap increase, that type of thing. They could have literally folded out the same dungeon format that we had at beta and started the whole cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think one thing that really kills rewards at the moment is the idea that everyone has to be able to complete every dungeon. So they have this idea where they feel like the entire community needs to be able to complete everything, and that there isn't stuff that's really difficult. And because they feel that everyone needs to be able to create everything, they then go and they say, well, because everyone can complete everything, we're going to make the rewards really bad, because if everyone can do it, then we can't really give you a good reward for it. So I feel like they need to make things more difficult. That way they can then justify adding good rewards to it.
Well, and if you remember in mod 1, you could, even if you couldn't get into that dungeon, you could buy that piece of gear, right? Because it would drop one piece that wasn't bound. So
Exactly.
even if you couldn't get in there, you had an option of farming AD or whatever and then buying that piece versus actually having to do the dungeon. And then once you had that piece, you were more capable to do the dungeon than you were before that, and you could buy and resell, earn that piece and resell it on the market. So there were options of getting it, not necessarily by running it, but it's a hard balance. But I do think we have to have diversity where different dungeons give something different, not the same thing. Otherwise, it becomes what can we run the fastest.
And I think like dungeon rewards should be more important than ever with the AD limit on how much you can earn on your account. That's how you get past that, is earning different things from dungeons and reselling them to players. And I did read that they put out the new reward blog today, and most of the blog on the reward blog for Mod 16 was them just showing pictures of the gear, right? It was really fashion based and very little statistical or actual what you'll be getting. So we'll see, as it goes to the future. But
Anybody else have an opinion on the loot?
But I think the key is going back to Galactic's initial question, which started in the last one of these sessions, was really getting around. They need to revisit the loot for all the game with each mod, not just okay, what do we put into the next dungeon? It's got to be an overall approach of okay, we need to rebalance our loot based on this new content, and that's where they've gotten away from it by just introducing a new seal and a new set of gear each mod.
Yeah, exactly. Because just one more thing I need to add before we move on. Sorry about that, Braelynn. Is like right now, I'll give you an example. Ravenloft, right? Ravenloft, when it came out, we were all excited. A harder new dungeon, interesting the way it looked inside. Some interesting mechanics, especially the first Three Sisters. I think have personally is the best mechanics in the game when it comes to a boss. Personally, and once you run Ravenloft, like you run Ravenloft, right, to get the seals, because the only thing good out of there is maybe an occasional UES, but you're not doing Ravenloft for the UESs. You're doing it to get the headpiece you want, the chest piece, or whatever it might be that you want. But once you get that, do you have any incentive to go back? That's my problem with the dungeons. There's no incentive to go back. There used to be incentive with Master Spell Plague when the fragmented Kia stars could drop twice in one run. When you used to get those far touched, where you can for Mastercrafters, which were worth 1-2 million. I'm not saying things should be worth 1 or 2 million. I'm saying there should be a reward that's worth your while to actually want to run the content, and that way you'll actually want to help lower end players because they might get a good reward from that. Because that's what I do in my guild. I help people get through stuff, but I feel bad at the same time because yeah, they made it through the dungeon, they learned how to do it, they saw it for the first time, but in the end, what's the reward for doing it? It's an insignia or one black opal. You know what I'm saying? I just want it to be able to be revisited and not die off after a week or two.
The problem with the current system that they've got in place is that it's vertical. It's not a horizontal system. So whenever they release a new piece of content, whatever they release is going to give you gear that is better than your current gear, right? Which means that wherever you got your previous set of gear from is now obsolete because you can get something better just by skipping it and going to the new piece of content. Whereas a lot of other games, what they'll do is they'll have a horizontal set of rewards. So the rewards for the new content is more or less even to the rewards from the old content. It just does something different instead of the same thing. And that different thing will be good in some circumstances, but then it'll be bad in others. So you have circumstantially good gear, for example.
Exactly. Okay, that's awesome.
Okay, the next question is for Putz. As a guild leader, can you please give us your opinions on current Stronghold content moving into Mod 16?
Well, as I understand it, we're getting a new Stronghold content, and past comments have indicated that they're not real keen on increasing the boons and that type of thing, which I'm okay with. Effectively, by increasing the number of stats required per percentage of damage, they're nerfing the stats by keeping them the same, which is okay. But I do think they should certainly have by now we should have gotten at least one more boon spot, especially if they're going to be replacing some of the stats with new stats. And many guilds need some place to put resources into because their coffers are filling up. So I think that would be very good that they should be considering, and it doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to add another boon spot without having to tear one down. And there should have been a way by now to take currencies from current campaigns or more current campaigns and apply them to the old campaigns, because right now you can only donate currencies up to mod 5, every mod since then, those currencies don't apply to the coffer, and we should have some way to translate that content into resources for the guilds, which would be very advantageous to the smaller guilds. And rebalancing marauders and dragonflight rewards. I think that's been talked about on here before, but that definitely needs to be done. New events. My eyes have always been on there. There's that tunnel on the west side of the Stronghold map. I don't know why that doesn't go down into some instance where there could be some kind of a skirmish of some form that the guild can participate in. Or why don't they take Siege PvP, which is effectively dead, and make a PvE version of that with some kind of guild rewards, where they don't have to rebuild a map. All they got to do is transform it to we're feeding catapults and trebekets or whatever, and protecting our strongholds. So I think strongholds definitely need some love. I think before on here we've talked about we need to have some attention made to building the community, and guilds and strongholds is a part of that community, and it's totally ignored while we're just tossing in another dungeon. And I think that pretty much covers it, but I think people know how I feel about that.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have talked about it in previous podcasts, and like my idea is like you need to make the stronghold attractive. Right now, the stronghold, all you do as a guild leader, because you're a guild leader, Braelynn's a guild leader, I'm a rank 6. We have responsibilities. We want to go to our guild, to our stronghold, and put an influence or whatever it is. But to actually do the heroics, you literally just one shot everything. I would like it if it was a bit tougher. I would like if there was like an end game, like a raid boss in there. Like just have a dungeon, but instead of a dungeon, just have a boss sitting at one spot where it'll take 20 people to kill. Because they did try to implement something new with marauders, but as we all know, marauders beyond level 5, there's no rewards, which I don't understand till this day why you get the same rewards by going higher. When you go higher, you should get better rewards. But even that was implemented wrong. But something along those lines, like wherever the dragons are, keep the dragon flight, make it a little bit tougher, because right now we could literally kill the dragon in 2 seconds. It's ridiculous. Make it so people want to go to the stronghold to do stuff, gain some rewards from the stronghold. Like even drop a neck piece that will be actually useful and not redundant and boring and not even worth it. Some good stuff in the stronghold is what I think.
Okay. Moving to the next question, to Sharpedge. This is a multi-tiered question, and I'm sorry for that. I tried to fit as much info into this one as I could. Can you please explain diminishing returns versus counter stats to us? And what do we need to be working on moving into the next mod? And do you think the changes are good or bad for the state of the game? So it's like 3 questions in one. I'm sorry.
Okay, so with regards to diminishing returns in Module 16, they do not exist. There are no longer diminishing returns in the game in Module 16. For example, in Module 15, the stat combat advantage has diminishing returns. It no longer has diminishing returns in Module 16. It just gives 500 of the stat for 1% for every 500 you invest. The same is true for all the stats, so power, critical strike, etc. With the concept of counter stats, the idea is good, in my opinion. The implementation is bad. So the concept of counter stats is that the enemies have some amount of a rating that you then need to overcome in order to deal damage. The purpose of the counter stats is so that as you get better, the enemies in the new dungeons can also get stronger. So that way, your stats are always useful. So if you get given more stats, they don't become useless at some point, because like on live, for example, you're going to get to 100% crit and then you have too much crit if you ever add more than that. And as you get more and more gear, it becomes harder and harder to balance your stats, because all you really want is power. Because like on live right now, you get to 100% crit, then you've got your armor penetration, and then all you really want is power, and that's it. Power and HP and defense slots, and you don't really have anything else you can add into. Then the problem with the way they implemented counter stats is that they are additive. So if you have less than the counter stat in terms of your offensive rating, so if you've got less critical strike than the enemy has critical strike resistance, then your critical strike does nothing. So you literally cannot critically hit. So long as you have less than the counter stat, you basically have no stats at all. You might as well just have 0 of that stat, because it's not going to do anything until you've got more than 32,000. I'm using the number 32,000, by the way, because that's how much of counter stats the enemies in the lair of the Mad Mage have at the moment. It's 24,000 for open world, not 32,000. But if you are building your character around lair of the Mad Mage, which is what you probably should be doing, then the enemies have 32,000 counter stats. The order that you're going to want to stack your stats next module isn't going to change much from live. First, you want your armor penetration capped. It's going to be 32,000. Then you're going to want to cap your accuracy, also 32,000. Then this is where it gets interesting. You're going to want power. So long as you are unable to overcome your enemy's counter stats, you're going to want power more than you're going to want critical strike and combat advantage. But if you can overcome your enemy's counter stats, then you're going to want critical strike and combat advantage. There's a very good tool on Janna's website, which is worth taking a look at, which can optimize your stats for you. So if you've only got like 50,000 stats, you can say, I've only got 50,000 stats, tell me where I must put these stats. And it'll allocate all those stats for you and say, this is what you should do with them. And so if you aren't really good at math, that's a great tool that you can just grab and you can use just to get your stats distributed for you. Now, as far as what I think of these changes, I'm a bit conflicted. I think some of them are good. Like, for example, the concept of counter stats is good, because the purpose of it is it's to add longevity to the stat system. It's supposed to make it last longer, but the way it's implemented is really bad, because it means that it doesn't feel good to have stats that are literally doing nothing, which is exactly the same problem you have in Module 15 if you've got more than 100% crit, for example. But it feels a lot worse in Module 16, because now it's a case of I've got less than some number, and I can't get rid of these stats in any possible way, and they aren't really doing anything. And so whilst the concept is good, it's bad because of that. It's also bad because the way they've tried to solve it is by forcing a lot of specific stat combinations onto gear, which makes it really difficult for you to actually balance your stats. Like if you want to get rid of armor penetration, if you want to get rid of, for example, say combat advantage, and you want to have critical strike, you can't do that, because every piece of gear that's got critical strike has also got combat advantage on it, which just makes it really difficult to get your stats the way you want them to be. And yeah, I think that's all there is for that question.
Yeah, I've noticed that, Sharpedge, by the way. Like, I tried to balance my stats on preview. It is almost impossible to do. Every piece of gear is the way you said it. Crit is with combat or whatever it is. It's really hard unless you change your pet's stats, I guess, or your insignias. But then again, most insignias have crit and combat advantage, or power and combat advantage. So it's really difficult to do.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that gets overlooked, diminishing returns, maybe this is just a personal philosophy, but diminishing returns is a way to keep people who have high gear from really being in a class all of their own, right? This is where we get into you've got to be 18K, because there is a big difference between a 17K person and an 18K person. And so from that perspective, I like diminishing returns, because maybe the gap between a 17K person and 18K person should be 1%, not 5%. The higher you get, you're still better, but you can't be that much better. And I know that goes in conflict with the idea you've got to give people incentive to get to 18K. But that's pretty demoralizing when you're 12K and everybody says, I don't want anybody but a 16K. And it's a legitimate question to have 16K, because it is a big difference.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I actually think was a really bad idea, was getting rid of diminishing returns, because they are very good at dealing with a lot of problems, which we wouldn't have if they had diminishing returns. But I think from the developer's perspective, they didn't want to include them, not because they don't acknowledge that it solves the problem, but because they feel like it's too complicated for a lot of the player base to understand, which, in my opinion, is the wrong approach to take.
Yeah, I would agree. I do like the idea of diminishing returns, and I think a combination of those two, diminishing returns and the counter stats, would have been the best method. But maybe they just don't have the resources to manage it, and that's a part we can only guess at.
Part of the fun was figuring out where those diminishing returns were too. At least for the theory crafters, the hard number type people, and then people are generous. Like Sharpedge did provide some resources. He told you where to go to find some great information, right? So it's not necessarily that nobody can ever figure this stuff out. It does get figured out and it does get passed around. It's just getting people to look at it. So I don't know if they need to necessarily make it easier to understand because, there are great guides out there to help people.
I also think that one of the problems we had in the old format was that there was no diminishing returns on buffs, and there was no diminishing returns on power. So we had multiple instances in the last format where power looping was a major concern, and the main reason it became a major concern is because it didn't diminish, and so damage just went through the roof when the power looping happened. And the same thing with not having diminishing returns on buffs. They just got out of control. They didn't need to eliminate buffs from the game. They just needed a way to make sure that it got balanced so that it didn't get spun too ridiculous. And that gives more creativity in your team composition because you can go, okay, SW has buffs X plus damage X versus DC has, buffs X plus times damage X. Which one's a better fit for this group composition? And now it's just going to be straight up damage.
All right. Okay.
Anybody have anything else on that?
Seems not, babe.
Okay, the next question is for Soly the Scourge. Knowing that the developers work on multiple modules at a time, how do you believe the massive rework they wanted to do in Mod 16 affected Mod 15?
Well, the obvious one is that they took some of their development team off of 15 and focused more energy onto 16 than they normally would, which really isn't a big deal to me. We're kind of used to these half module type things, even though they labeled it Mod 15. It kind of feels more like a half module because they just put less raw resources into it. The less obvious thing kind of going on here, and something I truly believe, is they kind of set the game into data collection mode in Mod 15. When I first saw what they were doing in 16 with the massive class reworks all across the boards, I immediately went back to 15. I'm like, okay, what were these hundreds of class changes you were doing in 15 about, knowing that you're going to scrap the whole system in 16? And a lot of it was experimental stuff that they wanted to test out, whether it be, making the control wizard less focused on control powers before they took it out of the name. They introduced Soul Investor for the Warlock, and now it's a bigger part to Warlock gameplay where it's on both sides of the path. The clerics themselves, they could not figure out why they would mess with Terrifying Insight, why they would take away, the party buff and switch it to a personal debuff. All of a sudden in 16, you're getting basically all your party buffs taken away and you're getting a DPS path. So there's a lot of experimental stuff going on in 15 that basically they wanted data on. But it really extends further than that to me because we also got the K-Team Challenge, right? Normally people wouldn't downgrade themselves and throw away their stats, but they create a system, they gave you nothing else to do but to try out this K-Team Challenge, which is supposed to be the new fun hard thing to do. And really what it's doing is testing their downscaling system across all dungeons because they set up in a way so it rotates. Otherwise people would just play their favorite dungeons, right? But they made it rotate so they could collect basically data on every single dungeon in the game and then use it when they go into 16 and do mandatory downscaling across all those dungeons. So to me, fun was kind of a secondary goal, obviously, in Mod 15. But I think a lot of what was going on in Mod 15 was basically data collection because they had, the private testing. Sharp, I believe, was a participant in it, which is good. But it's a small sample size. A better sample size is your entire player base, and I think that's what was going on in 15.
Then you'd think that they would learn that nobody did K-Team Challenge unless it was a T1 dungeon. So you got to wonder what data they were actually gathering.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting.
There were people that did Castle Ravenloft K-Team, but it was a very tiny proportion of the overall population.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult. It's just you get one shot all over the place. I find this this is a little bit off the question, but I find scale. Do you think scaling is working correctly? Because I feel like it's really, really difficult to kill stuff when I'm getting scaled down. Things are basically hurting like hell.
I don't like the concept of scaling at all, personally. For me, it feels like it just kills the immersion, right? Your characters, the point of progressing your character is that the old stuff gets easier and that the new stuff, and that you can just complete the new stuff. So by downscaling your character, you're basically killing off all the progression, because what's the point of gearing up if everything's always as difficult as it always is?
Exactly, makes total sense. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I put out a video kind of on that, and it's even like into the future. To go back to like the opposing role system, my worry about the opposing role system is really that they're gonna give every new monster they put in the game the same amount of gear stat points that I get too, and then it's just you don't gain power going forward, and then you're downscaled backwards, and you just kind of go nowhere. That's my biggest fear for the game.
Yeah, like the point of achieving a certain goal gear wise is so you don't have to struggle at other dungeons that you geared up for, and you can basically just walk right through it. So yeah, I agree with that.
Or carry friends.
Or carry friends, yeah. But now I can't carry friends if I get scaled down and go to Lost Mouth and get one shot by the mobs after the scorpions, because that's basically what's happening. Like I'm getting one shot as an end game player, which I think is ridiculous. But anyways.
Yeah, the funny thing about Lost Mouth on preview is that the mobs after the scorpions are the hardest part of the dungeon. Like, I can solo the last boss, I can solo the second boss, I can solo the first boss. The mobs after the scorpions, those wipe me 2 or 3 times.
That's what happens to me. That's why I gave that example. Everything else is fine, a bit harder than usual, obviously, which what you expect when you scale down. But those mobs, the five at a time, you basically get one shot. Like I got killed 2, 3 times doing that. Yeah.
Okay, the next question is for Galactic. Do you feel that the current game activity is up, down, or at a standstill until mod 16? Do you feel like it will improve when the mod goes live?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think we all know the answer to that. Every time a new mod drops, it always goes up. Now, will it return old players that have quit the game? I'm not talking about people that are banned. You know, people who just quit because they didn't like what they were seeing or whatever. I don't know. But every time there's a new mod release, we do have a spike in people. We notice that as guild officers and leaders. We see that in our rosters. We see that in PE. We see it wherever we go. The problem is they don't last. It doesn't last. There will be a spike. Definitely will be a lot more people playing the game in Mod 16 because there's been so much ruckus around it, right? There's never been podcasts to this extent about a mod as much as there have never been an overhaul this big, except for I think Mod 6 was a huge overhaul. But since then, we haven't had a huge change. Like this is basically a whole rework. So I do think it'll affect the community positively or negatively, because there is a lot of people saying they're going to quit the game, even though it's still on preview, even though we're making these podcasts and we do have some positive and negative feedback. Especially the beta testers like Sharp, who actually had a first-hand look at it way before we did because they were invited with the NDA and all that stuff. Even so, we just it's not finished, so we don't know the finished product. So I think our opinions are affecting people's choices in a way, either negatively or positively. What I keep telling people, like on my YouTube and stuff, is don't rush into it. Just because I'm not liking what I'm seeing so far in certain regards doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad mod. I'm expecting the worst, hoping for the best, and that's true. Like I'm really hoping that this overhaul is going to be amazing, and in the end it's going to be good. That's my opinion. I think we will have a spike in people. The problem is not that. The problem is keeping the people that we get, whether they're new or old. That's been the problem with Neverwinter: losing a lot of people and gaining less. That's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Galactic. I think a lot of people, when they hear me talk about Mod 16, they think I'm trying to tell them don't play it. I believe you should play 16. I actually think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's got extra developmental resources put into it. It's be brand new. I do think, however, it's going to be a little bit gimmicky. It only takes so long until, you've tested everything, you've played everything, you've got it down, and then you're left with the underlying changes, the long-term impacts to the game that I think might not be so great a direction. But 16 itself should be, at the very least, interesting. Whether or not you think it's a train wreck, you can at least be there to watch it. And I kind of look at it, going back to my original question, with the data collection type stuff, I think 15 suffered a lot because of 16. So if you played 15, you've kind of already paid the cost. You might as well try to enjoy 16 when it comes out.
Anybody else?
I've heard rumors that there's some guilds that are suffering people wise, but that's pretty typical at the end of a mod. I mean, we've been a long time since we've had a mod, and the last mod we had was 15, which wasn't a very big mod. The big thing I would like to call out to people is don't go off of what you're hearing from rumors and stuff, because they're changing stuff every week. And I went on, preview, and then I was like, geez, what's the point of even testing unless you're going to, be a contributor like Sharp is? Because so much stuff was changing. By the time I tested it, it was modified again. So, I would say step back and breathe, enjoy the content when it comes out, and relax. But right now, obviously, I think we're also probably seeing some decrease in gameplay. Hopefully, it picks up with the new mod, which it normally does. It's just a long break between two mods.
Anybody else on that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. Like, fuck, I just lost my chain of thought. Forget that. I'm being galactic. My bad. Keep going, babe. I lost my chain of thought. Brain farted. I'm sorry.
Okay.
15 beans.
15 beans. Yep, exactly.
Okay, the next question is for Putz. What do you think about the closing of the foundry?
I saw and had a lot of people complaining about the foundry, but ultimately they weren't people that were playing the foundry. For most people, the foundry was dead content, and I think that the company, whether they came out and said it clearly or not, was coming up to a decision point, which was we have a limited number of resources. We've either got to make foundry, we got to be able to monetize foundry, or we've got to get rid of it. And they probably looked at how are we going to monetize foundry and what are our options to do that, and decided that the cost to monetize it was just too high, and they eliminated it. Is it a big loss? No, it's sad to see it go, but it's not a big loss in terms of not many people played it. The idea was really great. You could be your own dungeon master, but in the history of Foundry, most of it was used for exploits. There was no reason to really run it since they took the AD bonus away from Rick's, which was forever ago. So for most purposes, it was dead content, and I'm okay with it leaving. I like the idea of it, but I'm okay with it leaving. And if anybody wants to run a Foundry, Neverwinter Remasters has Foundry in it, and it's supposed to be pretty decent.
Any other opinions on Foundry?
Okay, I'll give you my opinion on Foundry. I think it sucks, and it never should have been in the game in the first place. That's it. That's all I have to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's also a case of it doesn't really. What is its place in the game? It doesn't really do anything. It never really did anything. The only time it saw use, the only time I ever saw anybody on my friends list inside the Foundry was when Dragon Horde enchantments dropped stuff when you killed monsters in the Foundry. That was it. Like, that was the only time anyone that I knew was in the Foundry.
And that was 11 mods ago.
Yeah.
Okay, next question for Sharpedge. What is the top thing you'd change about the game, and what are some lost opportunities you've seen with the game?
Okay, so this is a bit of a wish list question for me, because it's basically, if you could change anything, what would you change? And the thing is that if I'm changing things, generally the Neverwinter community wouldn't be happy with them, because I like things that I know a lot of other people don't like. So top things I'd change, there are two things. Firstly, the skill tree. I don't like what they did with the skill system in mod 16. It's very simplified. I would prefer a much more complicated system. What I would do is I'd implement a skill system. If there was developmental resources for this, I would have a skill system that looked something like the Path of Exile skill system, which is a lot more complicated. Then a second thing that I would change is competitive PvE ladders. This is also going back to action RPGs. The one thing that they do very well is they keep PvE competitive. What they do is they basically recycle the entire game. So every 3 months they'll have a ladder, and the ladder will last 3 months. And during this period, you'll start on the separate server where the race is being held. You'll start with a fresh character with absolutely nothing. The in-game microtransaction stores will have nothing competitive. So, for example, Coal Woods wouldn't be there. and for such a competitive scene, Cold Wars and pets and things would need to be in the Astral Diamond store. They would not be able to be in the Zen market. Then what they do is they'll have a race, and people will generally race and compete and get whatever rewards they want. And there'll be like some race specific rewards. And I would implement this because it's very good for player retention, because if you're starting over with absolutely nothing, you've got to grind absolutely everything. It recycles the entire game. You need to see every single dungeon. It gives you a reason to play through all the old dungeons that you don't play through anymore, because if you want to compete and if you want to win whatever fancy, and okay, I'll use the example of Path of Exile again. If you want to win, for example, they have some fashion transmutes, which are race rewards. If you want to win those race rewards, you need to compete. And so it recycles the entire game, and it gets people to play all the content. Then as far as lost opportunities are concerned, in Module 16, the lost opportunities, I'd say, is the fact that they didn't implement diminishing returns. Also, I feel the boon system is a big lost opportunity. They could have done a lot more with that. They could have, what I would have done is make it so less of a case of a catch-up mechanic where every module they add new boons and you've got even more to catch up with, and make it more of a parallel system where you can only have so many boons active at once, and you complete the different campaigns and they'll have boons that are good in specific areas. Or there was another very good suggestion with the boon system put forward by, I think, TR Zeviat. I can't remember the suggestion, but he put it forward. It was very good. I think it's on the forums if anyone wants to read it. And I think the third would be combat dynamics, where if you look at the combat in modules 16, it's very bland in the sense that you have long cooldowns, and during the periods when your powers are on cooldown, you're basically just spamming at wills. Now, this isn't a problem on its own, because if you go back to like module 1 to 4, or module 0 even, back then you didn't have as many stats, and you would have long cooldowns as well. The difference was, though, that in those modules, because I went back and I looked at the videos of that when I was thinking about module 16 and wondering, why didn't it feel as bad back then? The difference is, back then, you also had fights where you had to move a lot more. So you wouldn't just stand still and attack. Whereas in module 16, you're still standing still and attacking. In module 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, you had to dodge. There would be lots of reds everywhere. You'd spend a lot of time moving. You'd do your encounters when in the window of the very short period of time where you could attack, and then the rest of the time you'd spend moving. So the dynamics of combat back then were very different, even though you had longer encounter powers. So I think that was a lost opportunity, not bringing back many more reds that you actually have to actively try and dodge.
Anybody else have an opinion on that one?
I'm good on my end. Go ahead, Putz.
Oh, well, I think, speaking to what you're talking about with the dodging in the earlier mods, Sharp, one of the things I think that they messed up on was giving Mark combat advantage. If you remember back in the early days, combat advantage was solely dictated by positioning, and Mark was just a threat enhancer. And that also meant that the tank had to move the mobs, into a certain location, facing away from people, so they weren't just swatting us all with AOE's. I don't see that level of play at the tank level in the current system, and I would love to see that returned.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing as well. That might return next module, because they're removing a lot of the easy ways to get combat advantage.
Some other things I've always thought would be good was, well, separating the damage mechanics, like ranged and melee, AoE and single target. Those are really meaningless mechanics in this game. Obviously, it matters for some of these special gear we have and getting your bonus percentages, but ultimately they don't really matter in terms of the dungeon. And so it leaves certain advantages basically to the GWF, who has the highest weapon damage, where you could have dungeons built around you. It benefits to have a CW or an HR that can do range damage, because it matters to this piece of the dungeon. Now we don't have that diversity, and that just means every DPS class is just being compared on their damage output, period. And there's no way they're going to be able to separate out those damage mechanics.
Absolutely agreed on that.
Anybody else have an opinion on lost opportunities?
And I think making CC a thing, even if it was just an interrupt on some stuff, CC for control wizards would be, or, well, for other classes besides control wizards, but CC's dead. So that's another group role or group dynamic that's just lost.
That actually kind of leads into the next question for Soly. Do you feel that the introduction of Mod 16 also introduces the death of class synergies? Do you feel they should bring this back, meaning like group play of playing your stats off of other people's stats kind of thing?
Yeah, the stat thing is kind of interesting. I don't think there should be a real like encounter-based group synergy reliance, and this question's a little bit hard to understand. So, what I mean is, I don't think like I should have to rely on somebody else to use a power to enable my power, because then I've got to understanding your build is fine, but before I go into a dungeon, I've got to have a 5-minute conversation making sure you're doing X, Y, and Z before we can even start the truck, and get this thing going. So I don't like those kind of dead times being put into dungeon runs into games. But I think that there's a lot of roles being taken out, and there's some roles that people actually enjoyed playing. People like the buff playstyle, right? Even though they didn't post numbers on the leaderboards, at the end of a dungeon, DCs were still the most in demand class, up until recent changes. People wanted 40% of a queue to be DCs. One thing I actually do miss is the speed aspect. I've always valued the raw running speed in some dungeons, right? It's not going to matter in Cradle where you're just sitting on the elevator. But I've always liked, Dark Revelry on the Warlock, into the fray with the Guardian Fighter. I liked that aspect to classes, and, they're cutting down on a lot of movement speed, and you can see it in Darks being removed. So, my ideal party composition used to be one speed booster, one buff, which was basically a cleric, one heavy hitter, and one tank, and then a last spot, a meta group, you'd put another buff person in there. I personally like to use that as a spot to, bring a lower item level person, help carry somebody through some new content. But, now they're really trying to, take all that and try to make it, a tank, a healer, and some DPS thrown in there. Whether or not you actually need a healer is, up for debate. And it's constantly changing on preview, so I'm not going to per se weigh in on that fully because we don't know the end product yet. But that's where things are going, and I'm going to miss the buff roll. I'm going to miss the speed boosting roll, those types of things.
With that, like a personal question for you guys that have tested on the new mod, more than I have. I'm a main DC. How do you see like that working in the future? Because I hear rumors that like they're just eliminated completely from group.
I guess I'll talk a little bit more, but like there's still healing items in game, right? Like I think I was joking with some people, but like a pure, a health stone, is that a DC? Just the ability to be able to heal yourself. Um, you know, and here's the thing, I don't know why you'd want to play a healer necessarily. There's a lot of like nostalgia, I guess, surrounding the Holy Trinity, but the reality is being a healer, to be relevant, you need to have your heals matter. So healing somebody needs to be a matter of life and death for the other players in the dungeon. But when you start changing the game into that situation, um, there's going to be a lot of frustration because when somebody feels that they're not getting healed enough, when somebody dies, because maybe you didn't have the resources to heal every party member, they're going to start getting angry at the healer. And, this stuff causes, problems in the community, harsh feelings towards each other. And so it might start becoming a problem in the future that didn't used to exist, just general anger levels rising. So
Another, sorry, I'm like coming up with questions on top of these questions. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
For everyone, do you feel with the anger in the community of like class destruction kind of things, do you feel that Cryptic will quickly come out with a new even half mod to correct those?
No.
No. What they do to fix things, as we all know, is they usually patch things. They're not going to come out with a half mod like a 12.5 or a 16.5. They're on the right track. Like let me make it clear, they're on the right track as it comes to a new mod. We do have to progress. MMOs do need to change and become better. It's just the way it's implemented. Like Sharpedge said before, it's just the implementation is wrong. It's not the direction is going is not wrong. It's the way it's been implemented that's wrong. You know, and what I worry about is the identity of the classes being shattered. That's what I think.
After I had posted the questions that we were going to use tonight, I had 2 new questions added. One is a question for Soly. How do you see the SW performing in the new mod?
Yeah, well, so there's 2 types of warlocks. You've got your DPS path and your healing path. So I'll talk about both, I guess. With the DPS path, it still has a lot of the kind of mechanics, the things that held it back in the past. It's just way too much work to get your damage output. In the past, I would stack all this DOT, which is great, and then a boss would go immune, right? And suddenly all that DOT disappeared. And I had to put curse, remove curse, put curse, remove curse. That type of stuff still exists, even though curse isn't on tab anymore. I've got to now basically allocate slots either, in my class features to turn on at wills to put a curse, or in my encounter powers to basically ensure that a curse is there in case I want to remove it, in case I want to do these other synergies. And they've also reintroduced stacking with Soul Investure, which is more of a play for the long-term damage mechanic. And these long-term payoffs have never really translated into good DPS. And it always put the Warlock in a weird position where the Warlock would do a ton of damage in the hard dungeons where, creatures would stay alive a long time, but they'd do really poorly, in the easier dungeons where things would die instantly. And so you've got somewhat of a stacking issue, that's going to still exist on the DPS Warlock. Along with the healing Warlock, I really think it has a big identity crisis, on how you want to balance your stats. You have a lot of features put into the game that are basically you're absorbing party damage onto yourself, and you can choose to self heal, or you can alternatively choose to party heal, and then you're still getting a bit of healing from dealing damage. And so it's like you've got a mixed bag of everything, and there's not really a clear direction on what it's actually trying to do. The healer in the past, or the healing warlock in the past, used to be basically a hybrid buff DPS. It was very clear playstyle that a lot of people enjoyed, along with the speed boosts, which I really liked. Now you've got this weird clunky mix of, okay, I'm supposed to both tank and heal and deal damage all at the same time, and it's just trying to do, it's too all over the place. And they've stated they're trying to make the game easier for people to understand what to pick, but you've got a mixed bag of everything on the healing warlock. So I'd like to see that cleaned up and one clear direction on it, so then you can have more alternatives in that one direction, rather than this all over the place approach.
Do you think the SW and the DC are going to be direct competition? I mean, they're filling the same void of one healer spec, one DPS.
Yes.
I haven't played much DC, to be honest. We still do have a small party buff in Pillar of Power. Small being compared to what we had in past mods, so that's a big plus in the Warlock's favor. Um, you know, but uh, a lot of the past reasons why the Warlock as a healer and as a support character was behind the DC was levels of upfront protection. Because in the old mods, um, everybody was fine once the party buffs were up, but it was taking those initial hits before people got their rotations going that were the most dangerous points in the game. And the DCs could throw AA on you before you even walk into a boss fight. So, in terms of upfront protection, I'm not sure which class offers most. Without playing the DC more and looking into it.
Yeah, Sharp was going to say something, and he said yes. Why did you say yes, Sharp?
Because they're basically just doing the same thing. So they obviously are going to compete with each other.
I think I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to chime in.
You
but
can
the
chime in.
SWC, I think the SW will outperform it in that respect.
Well, the challenge would be is if the SW is better at healer and better at damage, or if the DC is better at healer or better at damage. It essentially would kill the class because you would have no reason to run the other one. So I'm wondering I don't haven't played SW on preview, but I'm just wondering how they're balancing that out. You would hope that one outperforms the other on one tree and not the other.
So part of it might be the wrong question, right? Because it's not necessarily are these classes competing against each other. It's are these classes are competing against self-healing for a slot in the party, right? Because if self-healing is enough, then you don't need a healing cleric or an SW in the first place. So that's where the real competition for both classes is they're competing against self-healing, because if there's self-healing in the game, then you just take another DPS. You don't take one of these healing classes.
Which would work out if your damage is high enough. But if the class's damage tree isn't high enough, then you're not going to get in either way. It will be interesting.
Okay, another submitted question was for Sharpedge. Since you test all the classes, do you think any are performing, or sorry, how do you think they are performing in the new mod? Like, are some overperforming, underperforming, broken, etc.?
Okay, so this is specifically for the patch before the one today, because I haven't had time to check every single class on this current patch. So firstly, the ones that feel good, they're in a good position, are Wizard and Paladin. They feel good to play. The paths have a good idea. They've got a good identity. And I hate to say it to you Paladins, because I know that the Paladins are going to hate me for this, but you really need to stop whining about that class. It's in a good position. The only place it had to go from Module 15 to Module 16 was down. It was so broken in Module 15 that the only thing that could happen to it was it could get nerfed. And that's what's happened, which is why it's been nerfed since Module 15, right? The thing is, though, how it performs in Module 16 is it is actually a strong class. And I think looking at this patch, I am predicting for the current patch, I haven't had time to test it, but I'm predicting that Paladin's actually going to be overpowered in the current patch, and that it's going to get nerfed in the next patch. So I'm thinking next week Friday, Paladin's probably going to be getting a nerf, and this week Friday, Paladin is probably overpowered. Now, Warlock, in terms of performance, Warlock is performing very well. I'm not too sure about gameplay. I know that some people like it a lot. Others, I know, don't like it so much. So I think Warlock is more of a personal preference thing, whether you like the new gameplay or not. Because I've spoken to people that are on both sides of the spectrum that like it or don't like it. The performance is good, so it just comes to whether or not you like the new playstyle. Rogue, it wasn't performing so well last week in terms of damage, and in terms of Rogue is just bad. Okay, the feat path, it's got one set of good feats, and it's got one set of good powers. The feats are the opposite paragon to the powers, so it's basically got half a class on both paths. Stealth does absolutely nothing. It gives you combat advantage, which you will get from positioning. That is all that stealth does. So they've basically got no tab mechanic. Then Hunter, it's hard to judge. Almost everything about this class is bugged. So it's kind of like live, where everything about the class is bugged. So we can't really judge it, other than the fact that its damage performance isn't very good in its current buggy state. Maybe when the bugs are fixed, it's good. Who knows? It's too buggy to tell. Fighter, you're going to have to ask a fighter whether they like it or not. In terms of performance, it's not performing very well, but whether they like the gameplay or not, the general consensus about Fighter from the people I've spoken to and from the testing I've done is that it's too much standing still. Like, the vengeance mechanic doesn't feel good. DC, okay, this is a class that I play on live. I play Control Wizard and DC on live, okay? are both completely best in slot, multiple legendary mounts, etc. I'm not going to be playing DC in Module 16. I don't like what they've done with it. I don't think it's bad. I think it's okay, but I don't think it's a type of class that I would want to play. I think there was a place to keep a buff spec in the game, okay? And I say this, and I also say this thinking that it's probably easier to balance a buff spec than it is to balance a healer or a DPS, because you know very empirically how much a class has to be able to buff by in order for it to beat a DPS, and you know how much it has to buff. So you can very specifically make it buff by a specific amount where it'll only be good if you have so many players in the party. So if you've got 4 players in the party, adding and all 4 of them are DPS, then if you were to add 1 more DPS, that DPS would increase the party's damage by 25%. So in that situation, if a DC buffs the party's DPS by 25%, it will be as good as adding another DPS. So it's actually quite easy to balance a buff spec in terms of you think about how much you wanted, which DPS you wanted to replace, and then you just make it buff that much. And that's how you can balance a buff spec. But the problem that I have with DC and with the healers in general is that the gameplay is far too reactive and very passive. Okay, so let's say they do manage to get rid of all the self-healing, so you do have to rely on a healer now, right? Now, what you have to do is you have to sit around and wait for somebody to get hit, and then you've got to heal them. So for the most part, you aren't really doing anything. You're sitting around, you're reacting to stuff. Now, in other MMOs, this is fine. The reason it's fine is because you've got more to do than just heal. So, for example, if I take Terra, in Terra, you don't only have to heal. You have a few small buffs that you cast, and then a lot of the time you're going to be sitting there and cleansing stuff. So somebody gets some debuff, you have to go and cleanse it. Now, here, you don't really have to cleanse anything. You just have to sit around and heal. So in order to make the gameplay more fun, there needs to be more to do than just healing. So what I would do is probably make those cleanse powers that they've added to DC actually useful. But at the moment, the gameplay isn't fun in terms of the healer side. In terms of the DPS side, it's also very clunky. You stand around a lot, and although you can spam powers, unlike the other classes, because you've got a really easy way to build divinity, I just don't really like it compared to the old system. I think that it is a good system. I will say that. I do think it's a good system, but I don't think it's a system that I enjoy. Barbarian at the moment is very strong, but it's being reworked a lot. So I'm not sure. I can't say if the playstyle is good or not, because it's probably going to change entirely every week until it gets released. In the previous patch, the tank spec was doing 3 times more damage than it should. So Barbarian's all over the place at the moment. But in terms of DPS, it's in a good place. I think I've covered all the classes.
Yeah, perfect, Sharpedge, because I was going to do that if somebody didn't bring it up. Like I wanted, because a lot of people on my videos that I uploaded were saying, yeah, but nobody's talking about it with GF. Nobody's talking about an HR. You know what I mean? I'm glad you covered that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things people lose sight of when they hear all this feedback on these classes, and they hear that, I don't, the rogue doesn't hit as hard as it used to or whatever, it's kind of irrelevant, because your performance is relevant to the other classes. So if you're hitting harder than everybody else, but you're not hitting as hard as you are in mod 15, you're still king of the hill. And people are reacting to the floating numbers, but the floating numbers are ultimately meaningless until you start getting into dungeons and you've got group play and you're getting combat advantage and everything else. And then you can say, okay, is my class in a good space or not?
There's one thing I want to touch on too, and sorry, it's going to be directed to Sharpedge mostly because sorry we're crowding you, but you do a lot of testing and know stuff. So my question is, do you think the classes, not individually, but as a group, are going to synergize like they did in previous mods? Is there going to be any synergies, or is it all going to be just like there's 5 of us, you don't need a healer, or it doesn't matter if you have a healer, you just go, it won't work as a group kind of thing? Is that the way it's going to feel?
I think there's going to be a lot less synergy than before, but there will still be some synergy. But I'll definitely say like 90% of the synergy is going to be gone.
90%, huh? That's a huge number, man. Jesus. Yeah, because I like personally, this is my opinion, obviously. I think what made this game great was the synergy part of it. Don't you think like that was a big part of the combat system? Like that I could synergize with a DC, get that extra exalt. I'm not saying that means that I should one-shot everything. I don't agree with that. Like I don't want to one-shot everything. Nobody does, unless It gets them aroused for some reason. I want the content to be hard and difficult, but I still want the synergies. And it feels like my class, like a TR, like you said, it's trash. Like it's really bad, right? Or it's in a bad state. When I go on preview, I don't feel like I'm playing a TR anymore. I don't feel the synergies. I don't feel the group being a group. I feel like we're all individually, separately there, and not part of a team, and all just trying to do the same thing without any synergies whatsoever. You know what I'm saying? If you understand, yeah.
I think they could have nerfed things while still keeping some sense of synergy. And the way you do this is by you make each class need something from some other class. So you give each class some sort of weakness, and then that other class will complement it and fix that weakness. So it will. But here's the thing. Okay, I really like the synergies. The reason they were removed is not because people that like running dungeons don't like synergies. The reason the synergies were removed is because people that run around and do solo content hate the concept of being weaker because they need something from another class in dungeons, even though it'll lead to more interesting gameplay, because they want to solo things without having any weaknesses.
So it's basically being dumbed down.
Yeah.
Because go ahead, Putz.
I think they removed. I mean, they've removed so many synergies the game had. I mean, back when ITF was resulted from how much their damage resistance was, and then the DODC was superior at providing damage resistance buffs, and they could partner together. Or you had, the Smolder with, Master of Flame working with the regular CWs. I mean, these were synergies that we had between classes, and they got overpowered, and then they just get removed. And I think they've just found that it's easier just to take away those things than try to, okay, how do we balance them so that they're not so overpowered?
Yeah.
Also, like, buff timing windows were a big part of it too. Like, I'm gonna hit X power now, and it's gonna be effective for 10 seconds, and so everybody builds their buffs up to this crescendo, where you deal a ton of damage, in the right time frame. And yes, some of that stuff is hard to understand. It requires an in-depth understanding of the other classes and what they're doing and where their time windows are. But there were guides put out on that, right? If anything is important enough in the game, somebody's going to create a useful guide on it. And so, there are these resources are available. So, I don't think those kind of things need to necessarily be taken away to dumb down the game and make it playable, because, people can learn it. I believe that, so.
Yeah, like one of the major issues I have with the new mod is basically that it's so oversimplified. Like I like the fact that I can go into my feat tree. Granted, most feats and most classes didn't work correctly, if I'm correct, Sharp. Like they just weren't balanced properly. So I want the ability to have a mind of my own and make my mistakes and learn from my mistakes. But if it's dumbed down to just 5 feats, you're limited to your mistakes. How many times are you going to make a mistake? You only have 5 choices out of 10 boons. You know what I mean? I want the boons to actually work correctly, because I don't know if this is true, Sharp, because you test this stuff, but Integrity did a solo dungeon. I can't remember which one, a couple of them actually, without any boons or feats at all, and he had no problem getting through it. He saw no difference.
Yeah.
Is that true? Like it doesn't even matter. Yeah.
Feats wise, he tested on a great weapon fighter, and 18 out of the 20 great weapon fighter feats at the time were broken. They did nothing. So even if he didn't stick them in, they wouldn't have done. Even if he did stick them in, they wouldn't have done anything anyhow. I'm not sure if they're fixed yet or not, but at the time, 18 out of 20 did nothing.
Exactly. So yeah, basically, like what I'm trying to say is like, when I play an MMO, right? Like, because I'm gonna be honest with me and Braelynn right now, we're looking to other MMOs. I'm not gonna stop playing Neverwinter, but we want to play something that will gratify you. The sense of an MMO is that you're in a community, you're having fun, and you're progressing. You have the sense of progression. With Neverwinter, progression stopped ages ago for me. Like, there's no sense of achievement.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So if you're gonna dumb it down, like, it's no challenge for me. Like, I'll give you an example. I post guides. You post guides. So many people here post guides. If you're gonna post a guide for Mod 16, don't you think that video will last anything more than 2 minutes? I don't think so. Because it's going to be simplified feats, simplified boons. Choose whatever boon you want, since they don't matter. And the chance for making a mistake to actually learn from your mistake is irrelevant. It's not going to matter, because everybody's going to be a copy of a copy of a copy, the way it's going now, right? So if it was up to me and I was Cryptic, I know this is going a bit like off topic kind of, but I would like to add more feats and add another feat tree as long as it's balanced to give us opportunity to not be copies of a copy, to be unique. I want my tune to be unique. I don't want to be the same as Blur's or Trem's or Tardley's. I want it to be different because, it's my tune. Why should it be the same as anybody else? And I'm pretty sure.
What
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
said is, like, from my perspective, if I could go off my wish list, what I would do is I'd end up with just a feat tree that looks something like Path of Exile skill tree, where you've got limitless choices basically. But we can't have that. So
Yeah. So you see where I'm going with this? It's just like I understand they're a company, and as a company, you need new customers, new clients. I understand that they need to make money. I understand that, but to disregard everything and just make it about them is not really fair. Like they're giving them more ways and tools to level up quicker. It took me 3 years to level up. If you remember Sharpedge, like how hard it was to actually gear up back in the day, it was much harder now.
Yeah.
Now the experience has been cut in half or more. Gear is a lot easier to get. They just I don't know why it's getting so simplified. It's not fun that way for me. Like I want the challenge to go into my feat tree and have to really think about what I need to do. Granted, even before Mod 16, people were copying other people's builds, but at least you had the.
Module 15, for me, Module 15 isn't really that different from Module 16 because everyone just copies everyone, which is why I said, because I agree with you 100%, it shouldn't be a case of copying people. But to get there, you need a much more complicated feat tree than the one we've got at the moment.
Yeah, because at the moment it's just 5. And remember, we ran a dungeon, what was it, a couple of weeks ago with Lightbringer? We ran Lair, and I actually asked you about 1 feat. But normally, under different circumstances, I would have been asking you about 10 feats, but there's only 5. So, you know what I'm saying? It's just so easy. And you gave me a quick answer. You said, nope, that's doing that, and that was it. And then when I post my guide, I'll tell everybody about that feat, and then everybody's going to have the same exact feats. Like, there's no variety, is what I'm trying to say.
If we play devil's advocate, though, is there any chance that they just don't have the resources and they're saying
that's definitely why. That's my thought.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, okay, I can't monetize feats, but I can monetize content, and so we need to free ourselves up from managing this balancing issues and move ourselves over to spend more time on content. At least that would be a positive way of thinking of it, rather than we just don't have the resources. We're going to cut everything back. But maybe they're just saying we need to direct our resources towards this one thing that we know how to monetize.
Yeah. Like this game has so many issues right now, and I don't want to touch upon all of them. Like the Zen market. Like when is the Zen market ever going to go back down? That's another issue. But that's a bit off topic from Mod 16. But generally, like my general feeling about Mod 16 is I like the direction it's going. I just don't like how they implemented stuff, like Sharpedge says. And he has a better view than I do because he actually does know how to test it properly. I can't. But from what I feel, all I can do is go off as how my tune feels and how my brain doesn't need to work as hard to get my character to work. What's the best gear? That's the best gear. Slot it on, doesn't matter. Balancing stats is so difficult that it doesn't matter what you do. You can balance them, tweak them just a little bit, but then again, you're always going to have more of another stat or less of another. It's just I don't know. I just don't get that portion of the game. Just like the recovery, for example. I agree that we had too much recovery, but they could have just took that recovery and just implemented a lower percentage to it. I guess the amount of recovery,
or diminishing return,
or diminishing returns. Yeah, like make it you get 1% recharge speed, for example, for every 800 or 1,000 recovery. But to totally remove it, I think it was mostly due to coding. They want to simplify things so they don't have code as much or go that far back to patch stuff. That's part of it, I think.
Yeah, the dumbing the game down stuff is really where I get upset. And I agree. It is to make the game easier to balance in the future. But their stated intent, multiple people, from Cryptic have said it in multiple places. Well, they don't want newer players to feel bad for making mistakes, or for making the wrong choices. And, in their opinion, too many people were picking the wrong things, so they basically took the whole game away and replaced it with a dumbed down version. And to me, that's what the community is there for. The community is there, whether you be a guild leader, like so many people in this chat are, whether you be somebody who puts out guides, either in video form, in paper form. That's what all the community is there for, and they help each other out. And I see so many people doing great things. And Cryptic all of a sudden comes out, of nowhere and says, well, people are still making wrong choices, so we're dumbing the game down. And you have to deal with the effects.
The problem with the whole dumbing the game down thing, is there was an experiment done by Valve, the game company, ages ago, with what they had a corridor. It was a long straight corridor, and then somewhere in the middle, it turned left and turned right. And the goal was just to get out of the corridor. And if you turned left, it went in a big loop round and ended up back where you started. And they found that a very large proportion of people would just keep taking the left turn every single time, and they would never get out of it within the time limit. And the thing about that is it's exactly the same thing in the community here. You can't just take the stance, okay, we're going to dumb everything down, because eventually the only way to get people to not make an incorrect choice is to eliminate absolutely every single choice, because even if you've only got one choice, some people are still going to take the wrong one.
Well, and I don't think that the people making wrong decisions, it's not even a valid argument. I think that argument is just based on trying to personalize it, because at the end of the day, all you got to do is reduce the cost on retraining tokens. I mean, let's be realistic. It's not that hard to get a retraining token. But let's say if you don't like it, people feel bad and they leave the game, then give them a free retraining token for every 10 levels they level up or whatever, so that they have an ability to reset themselves. There are other options than dumbing the game down. So that's not really the real reason. That just makes it seem like they're being good humanitarians about it.
I think that's for new content players too. Like, so once you get to the end game content, you know that resources exist to respec your character the way you want it, or find out which stats you want. So they basically are moving this whole module to newer characters so they don't make mistakes from the start and leaving the rest out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Bray, anything else?
Okay, final question for everyone.
Can I just throw one more thing on that?
Of course, actually? Of course.
Yeah, the one thing for me that I strongly disagree about that whole making bad choices thing is that part of making bad decisions is how good it feels after you correct it. Like, you make a bad decision, then you fix it and you work out what you did wrong, and then your character feels so much better to play, and you don't have that experience if there are no bad choices to make in the first place.
Exactly. Oh yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, you can never feel good unless you have the risk of feeling bad.
Exactly. No accomplishments then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the last question is for everyone. Are you happy with what you've seen so far in Mod 16, the Undermount?
Anybody feel free to go first?
Okay. Yeah. I have mixed emotions about it. I think for me, Undermountain just comes down to one thing. If they actually manage to make it hard and interesting hard, not just everything one-shots you, then I will be interested in staying around and playing it. If otherwise, I'll probably just leave the game. It's for me, that's what it boils down to, because if the combat isn't interesting and if you don't actually have to like try to do things, then I'm just going to get bored out of it.
Putz, what do you think?
I think that, well, my big concern, of course, is the playability of the DC, because that's what I primarily play. And so I'm kind of holding my breath on that. But it's the people that keep me in the game, not the game itself. I try to reinforce that to people all the time, that if it was about gameplay, we would all be playing RPGs and not MMOs, because RPGs are superior. But it's not all about the gameplay. It's also about the people we interact with, and we need to have an environment that facilitates that. Now, if the game scares off a bunch of people because they don't like it, beyond just myself, and maybe I don't like the DC mechanic, but if people just start believing and you have nobody to interact with, then of course, yeah, you're gonna you're going to look for other options. So I'm happy to see that they're making big changes. I found amusement like watching Nova's videos where, 3 months ago he says mod 16 has to be the biggest mod ever, and then all of a sudden he's putting out, whoa, they need to slow it down, there's too much change. And it's like, well, which one is it? You want the biggest mod ever? You want no change? And you pick your poison. And I think something had to happen. It's not necessarily the avenue I would have taken. I don't have the knowledge of the resources and things that they do. So I'm hoping they're making good decisions. But ultimately, it's just about the people you play with, and hopefully, with your friends, you can find a niche in a new game that you like and can maintain those friendships.
Okay, Soly, what do you think, buddy?
Yeah, I think overall it's just gimmicky, right? Like, I've played this game for years. I planned on, and I guess still kind of do, playing this game for years in the future. But I think there's an overwhelming urge in 16 to make everything so new and so many changes. and they're sacrificing a lot to do it. It's just there's gonna be some short-term amusement, some short-term, new value, but overall in the long run, I think they're just sacrificing so much that it's gonna, hurt the game.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Soly. And I want Braelynn, you give us your opinion on this. What do you think about Mod 16?
No, I wasn't prepared to give my opinion on this.
Well, give it now.
I think I come from a game that was very complicated, and I came to this game thinking it was very dumbed down game, and then got used to it, and now it's dumbed down even more. So it feels kind of depressing to me that
Yeah, EVE Online is
I need harder content. Yeah.
EVE Online is a very complicated game. I took a look at it. That game isn't for me just because I don't like space. So otherwise I would have played it.
Well, she played Final Fantasy for 10 years. What was it?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Bray?
No, I just would have liked to see things become more complicated than less. That's all.
Okay. All right. It would have been more fun. Yeah, I agree on that. Well, for me, Mod 16 is beautiful. We can't, I got to give props where props are due. The graphics are amazing. But graphics alone and the way something looks is just, a turn on to people who are just starting the game. But to people like me and you, Sharpedge, Soly, and Putz, who have been in the game for 4 or 5 years, we look beyond that. We want to see how the classes have their own identity and that there's synergies and you feel that you're progressing and all that stuff. As far as the new mod goes, as a mod, it's a good idea if it's implemented correctly. I don't enjoy having to wait 30 seconds to drop a smoke bomb. I like to be cooperative, so I'm cooperating with my DC, with my paladin to make this dungeon work. So in general, it's a good idea. I'm hoping it will work out because I love this game. People mistake my negativity or my where I don't like certain things that I don't want it to be a good mod. I do believe it will be an amazing mod if they implement the changes that testers like Sharp and so many other testers have shown them the way, told them what's wrong with the game and what they could do to change it. So in general, I think it'll be good. Am I going to continue playing? I don't know. I won't know till the finished, polished product and all the patches go on live. And granted, when it does go live, they're still going to continue patching things. It won't end with preview. But from what I know from MMOs, there's really big companies out there that they put things on beta, and if it doesn't work out and people don't like it, they scrap it. That will never happen with Neverwinter. Whatever goes on preview always ends up on live, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct? Whatever is on preview always ends up on live. So
I haven't heard of a giant scrap since beta yet.
Yeah, because Lineage did it. They were coming out with what was it, Lineage something, and they scrapped the whole thing.
Project.
Yeah, because the community wasn't happy. And one thing I am really happy about is the devs are really paying attention to us more. I can't say the same for the TRs because Worries is not paying attention to us in the forums as much as other devs are. Granted, he's probably really busy or whatever. But I'm happy with that aspect that they're interacting more. But they need to listen more as opposed to just interacting. Just by saying, "Oh yes, that's a good idea," or agree doesn't mean that anything is happening. I could agree to anything, but if I'm not doing anything about it, it's like you didn't even listen in the first place. So yeah, that's my opinion on Mod 16. It should be good. We'll see.
I just hope I don't have to delete my DC.
Okay. All right, guys. You guys have anything else to add before I end the podcast? I'll take that as a no. All right, so I would personally like to thank everyone watching the stream, and especially the people who found time to join this podcast. I especially want to thank Putz, Amber Gristle in game. I want to thank Soly the Scourge for taking the time, and Sharpedge, because I know Sharpedge is really busy and he's in a very different time zone than we are. So thank you very much, guys, for joining in and helping out the community. I will continue to do podcasts every Friday until the mod drops, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it, man. We're all free to go.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
For letting us come.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.